I've always believed land remembers. Every footstep, every shovel dug, every drop of water. Drawn it holds memory like an old photograph faded under the sun. That's what this farm was to me. Not just a stretch of soil and trees, but a living record of my family, my roots, and the quiet resilience of those who came before me. The well out back wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was the heart of it all. My father dug it during the drought of '72 with his own hands, his shirt soaked and back burning under the sun, refusing to let his crops die. I was 10 then, watching from the porch, clutching a glass jar of lemonade. I didn't dare drink without offering him first. That image stuck with me. 43 years later, I stood at the edge of that same well, now covered with a steel lid and solar-powered pump system I installed myself after retiring from the National Guard. I'd spent most of my life in uniform, bouncing between disaster zones and war-torn regions, only to return here to the land that had never once betrayed me. The water that came up was still cold, still clean, and still tasted like home. After my wife passed, I kept mostly to myself. I tended the orchard, maintained the fencing, and split my days between the field and my barn workshop. I knew the HOA had expanded since I'd last paid attention, and rows of prefabricated homes and glossy driveways creeping toward the southern boundary of my acreage like ivy. But our land had been grandfathered out decades before the HOA even existed. I didn't vote for it, didn't join it, and sure as hell didn't need it telling me how to run a farm my family had owned since 1948. I remember the first real sign of trouble came during a late afternoon in April. I was sanding down an old rocking chair on the back porch when I noticed a white SUV parked awkwardly near my west fence line. A woman in heels stepped out, clipboard in hand, and began snapping photos of my well from the road. "Can I help you?" I called. She didn't answer at first, just adjusted her sunglasses and took another photo before shouting back, "You're the one with the unregistered water structure, right?" I set my tools down slowly. "You mean the well on my land?" She nodded like she had the upper hand. "Your well is within half a mile of HOA-maintained properties, and we've received multiple complaints about unauthorized water access. It needs to be inspected and brought under regulation." I remember laughing, not mockingly, but out of genuine confusion. "It's not under your jurisdiction." She checked her clipboard. "Sir, any structure affecting communal resources, including aquifers, falls under Provisional HOA Water Code 3.7c. You'll be receiving a formal notice." I didn't raise my voice. I just told her plainly I drink from that well. I irrigate my crops with it. That water doesn't go anywhere else. You have no right. She turned and got back into the SUV without another word. 3 days later, the letter came. Thick, official-looking envelope with embossed lettering. I opened it at the kitchen table, coffee still hot beside me. Inside, a demand to cease all use of non-compliant water structures, and a notice that a survey would be conducted to assess environmental risk factors to the adjacent neighborhood. I could feel the heat rising in my chest. They wanted my well. They called it a risk. But the only risk was someone realizing their tidy HOA homes were built atop a parched, fragile zone, and my well was the only reliable freshwater source for miles. I drove down to the HOA office that afternoon. It was a glass and brick building stuck between a nail salon and a frozen yogurt shop. I walked in wearing boots still caked in soil and a hat that had survived hurricanes. The receptionist didn't look up. "I need to speak with whoever sent this," I said, placing the letter on the counter. She raised a brow. "Name? Ray Hammond." She clicked through a few tabs on her computer. "They've flagged your property under committee review. You'll need to submit an appeal in writing or attend the monthly board hearing." "When's the next one?" 2 weeks, Wednesday at 7. I nodded. "I'll be there." I walked back out to my truck with the same feeling I had the first time I landed in Kandahar, a gut deep, knowing that this wouldn't be quick or clean. That night, I sat on the porch and listened to the pump hum quietly under the stars. That well had saved my orchard more times than I could count. During the drought of 2009, when city pipes were dry and folks were driving 20 miles for bottled water, I'd left 5-gallon buckets by my front gate for anyone who needed. I never charged a penny. Some of those people lived in the same neighborhood now, sending letters to take it all away. I didn't sleep much. My father used to say, "When someone tries to take what's yours without cause, they're either ignorant or entitled. Both are dangerous." By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't giving an inch. I'd fight them legally, morally, with every last drop of that well if I had to. This wasn't just about water. It was about dignity, about memory, about the land itself. And I wasn't about to let a shiny HOA board rewrite the story of this farm. The morning sun cut through the blinds like spears of judgment, but I was already up, coffee in hand, boots laced. I'd been raised on the kind of discipline that never waited for the alarm. After 30 years in the service and another 10 trying to remember how to be still, I'd learned to recognize the signs of a coming storm. And this HOA letter wasn't just weather. It was a pressure drop in my gut. The second letter arrived 2 days after my visit to the office. Certified mail this time. That was their way of pretending to play fair. I signed for it, turned the envelope over in my hand, and felt the weight of bureaucratic arrogance settle on my front porch. I opened it slowly, like it might explode. Inside, a formal cease and desist citing HOA water use and aquifer protection bylaw 3.7c, along with a map of their expanded enforcement zone. Apparently, they'd voted without my presence or consent to redraw boundaries to include parts of adjacent parcels. Mine, of course, sat at the edge like a ripe apple on a low branch. Convenient. According to the map, my well now fell under their provisional jurisdiction due to aquifer adjacency. I stared at the red-shaded zone. It was as fictional as a child's crayon scribble. They'd decided the rules applied to me because it suited them, because someone wanted my water. Attached was a timeline, a scheduled hydrological inspection the following Tuesday, and a clause stating I was to refrain from drawing groundwater in the interim. That part made my hands shake. Not out of fear, out of fury. That water wasn't just mine. It was my livelihood. It ran the irrigation pumps, fed my hens and goats, hydrated the earth beneath my orchard. They were trying to starve the land by starving me. I called the number on the letter. A cheerful automated voice offered me 6 options, none of which led to a human being. I left a message, then another. Then I called the county clerk. HOA jurisdiction doesn't supersede private well rights, the woman on the line said flatly, though she sounded like she'd said it one too many times. But if they voted to expand the covenant area and your deed doesn't specifically exempt you, you might be in a gray zone. It's been private since 1948, I told her. Original deed, grandfathered usage water table rights documented in 72 during the drought crisis. That's helpful, she said. But you might want to talk to legal counsel. I hung up and stared across my field, the tall grass rustling like whispers. Legal counsel. I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't need one until now. That afternoon, a white pickup rolled slowly up my driveway. A man stepped out wearing steel-toed boots and a badge-shaped patch that read Certified Environmental Inspector. Another guy followed, clipboard in hand. I walked to meet them halfway. You're trespassing, I said calmly. We're here on official HOA authorization to conduct a preliminary visual assessment, the first man said. We're not entering the well zone, just documenting. Which part of private property was unclear. The clipboard guy looked at the survey map. Technically, sir, as of last week's vote, this parcel is included under emergency extension. You touch my well, I said, and you'll find out how deep it goes from the bottom. They exchanged glances, then walked back to the truck. One snapped a photo over his shoulder before they left. I noted the license plate, called a friend at the sheriff's department. Small town still had its uses. That night, I got a text from the daughter of my old army buddy, Paul Reynolds. She lived 2 blocks inside the HOA perimeter with 3 kids and a husband who worked night shifts. She asked if the rumor was true that the HOA was trying to shut down my water. Looks that way, I texted back. She replied, they said it's contaminated, that it's illegal. They told us not to take anything from you anymore. What's going on, Mr. Hammond? I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. It's not contaminated. It's not illegal. It's just inconvenient for someone that I still have water. The next morning, I found my mailbox open, flapping in the wind. Inside was a printed flyer. Urgent notice. Unauthorized well under investigation. The HOA board is actively addressing a potential environmental hazard affecting the health and safety of our residents. Please refrain from interaction with Mr. Hammond's property until further notice. Thank you for your cooperation. I stood there under the gray sky, the paper crumpling in my fist. They weren't just coming for the well anymore. They were coming for my reputation. I didn't have kids to defend me online. I didn't have a wife to post in the community Facebook group. But I had my files, my service records, my water tests, and my damn memory. I opened the barn, pulled out an old military footlocker I hadn't touched in years, and started sorting through the documents I kept all this time. The original well permit, dated 1972. Copies of county hydrology maps. Letters from the EPA, thanking me for voluntary water samples during the 2009 drought. Even a FEMA survey I helped with back when I still worked logistics for the Guard. I had receipts. By sunset, I'd assembled a binder 2 inches thick. Let them come, I thought. Let them send letters. I'd send truth. I made photocopies, then drove into town and dropped a sealed packet at the local paper, no note, no return address. Just facts. The HOA had drawn first blood. I wasn't going to sit back and hope the storm passed. I was going to stand in the middle of it and make damn sure they knew whose land they were walking on. 2 days after I delivered my packet to the local paper, the fence posts went up. It was early morning when I heard the grinding of augers and the sharp clang of steel striking earth. I stepped out onto the porch, coffee steaming in my hand, and saw them 5 men in bright yellow safety vests, hammering stakes into the boundary that ran alongside the east side of my well. They moved like they had authority, like they were building something that belonged, but they weren't. I didn't rush down there. I watched first. I observed. It's what I'd done for years as an operations specialist in Afghanistan. Learn the rhythm before confronting the chaos. They were building a perimeter, not around their land, around mine. I walked out, boots crunching over the dry gravel that lined the road between my orchard and the HOA homes. No signs, no warnings, no permits posted. Just 5 strangers putting up chain link fencing like they were cordoning off a crime scene. Who gave you permission to build on this property? I asked, voice calm, clipped. One of them, a man in his 30s with a beard too neat to be honest, looked up and blinked. This here is an HOA authorized structure, he said, tapping a folded piece of paper attached to his clipboard. We're installing protective fencing to prevent unauthorized use of shared environmental resources. I reached out and took the paper from his hand. It wasn't a permit. It was a typed letter on HOA letterhead, unsigned with jargon about water runoff liability zones and pending assessments. No government seal, no surveyor's stamp, not even a county reference. This isn't authorization, I said. This is fiction. Sir, if you interfere, we're instructed to notify security. You're trespassing, I said. You've crossed the eastern survey line by 15 feet. If you don't take down those posts right now, the sheriff will be hearing about this. He laughed a little, then signaled to one of his coworkers. Call it in, he muttered, pretending not to be rattled. I didn't wait. I pulled out my phone and called Deputy Vargas. I'd known him since he was a kid playing baseball with my nephew. He answered on the second ring. Ray. Yeah. I've got a crew putting up fencing on my private land with a fake HOA directive. Can you get someone out here? I'll be there in 20, he said. Don't let them move anything. I folded my arms and stood by the well as the workers shifted uncomfortably. One of them muttered something about just doing our job. Another lit a cigarette with a shaky hand. They were contractors, probably hired on short notice, told it was all legal and clean. But the deeper the fence went into my property, the clearer it became that they were just muscle for a bigger scheme. Vargas pulled up in a dust-coated cruiser, got out with that slow walk all deputies seemed to perfect, and raised an eyebrow at the scene. Morning, boys, he said to the workers. You got paperwork for this build. Beard guy handed over the same useless letter. Vargas skimmed it, looked at me, then back at them. This ain't a county permit. You can't build on private property without one. This is HOA jurisdiction, the man replied. HOA don't trump county law, Vargas said. Not unless they own the deed. They claim it's within their utility easement, he added, a little less confident now. Let's pull the plat map, Vargas said, already typing on his tablet. A few seconds later, the parcel outline appeared on the screen. He turned it toward them. That's Mr. Hammond's property. No easement on file. You're going to need to move that fence. The contractors exchanged glances. We were told, move the fence, Vargas said more firmly, and don't come back without a permit. Got it. They started pulling up stakes. I didn't say a word. I just stood there until they loaded their tools and drove off. The tension didn't fade with the truck exhaust, though. I knew this wasn't the end. This was posturing an attempt to mark territory, even if only temporarily. Vargas stayed a moment longer. You sure you want to go to war with these people? He asked, watching the dust settle. I'm not starting anything, I said. I'm just refusing to surrender. He nodded. You've got history on your side. But they've got money, Ray. Lawyers, board members in the county planning office. I've got water, I replied, and a community that's thirstier than they want to admit. That afternoon, I walked the fence line and found freshly painted HOA notice of violation signs nailed to my orchard tree's bright red laminated accusatory. I took photos of each one before tearing them down. Then came the cameras. 3 days later, a security system appeared mounted to a pole just outside my property line, but aimed directly at the well. No signage, no warning. Just a little blinking red light, watching my every move. They wanted to provoke me. They wanted to catch me retaliating, trespassing, or reacting emotionally. But they didn't know me. I'd learned patience in war zones. I could wait longer than any of them. Instead of lashing out, I documented everything. Photos, GPS coordinates, statements from neighbors. I added it all to the binder I was building now, almost 3 inches thick. And then, just as I expected, the second crew came back. But this time they brought someone with them. A woman in a tan pantsuit stepped out of a silver Lexus and approached the gate with the kind of confidence only HOA presidents seem to exude. Her name was Deborah Linnington, and she introduced herself as acting compliance chairperson. She smiled, shook my hand, and said, "Mr. Hammond, I'm here to offer a cooperative resolution." I didn't let go of her hand, I just stared. "You're building fences and installing cameras on property that doesn't belong to you," I said. "That's not resolution. That's harassment." Her smile didn't fade. "We believe there's been a misunderstanding about boundaries. Our survey suggests—" "Your survey is irrelevant," I snapped. "This land is mine, deeded, recorded, and paid for in full. The well belongs to my family. You don't get to rewrite that just because your lawns are drying up." Her voice softened, syrupy. "Mr. Hammond, we're simply trying to ensure the safety of our community. That well hasn't been inspected, and we have liability concerns. In the event of contamination," I stepped back. "Lady, that well is cleaner than half the reservoirs in this county, and I've got 30 years of documentation to prove it." She adjusted her purse strap and gave me a look I'd seen 1,000 times before in officers who outranked me, but couldn't outthink me. Contempt and calculation wrapped into one. "Well," she said, turning to leave, "I hope we can find a peaceful resolution. We wouldn't want this to escalate." Too late, I thought. By the end of the week, the cameras were still up, but the fence was gone. The signs were replaced with bright orange flags marking proposed soil survey zones. I knew what came next. They were going to try to prove I was poisoning the land, or at least claim I might be. But I wasn't going to wait anymore. It was time to act. That night, I pulled out my old FEMA credentials and made a call. I didn't sleep the night before the board meeting. Not because I was nervous I'd seen far worse behind Kevlar and sandbags, but because I knew what this really was: not a hearing, not a discussion, not a fair process. It was a performance, and I was the uninvited prop in someone else's script. But I was done playing quiet. They wanted to put on a show. Fine. I'd bring the spotlight. The community center was packed tighter than a barracks bunk room. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting, a row of folding tables up front, with placards for each HOA board member. Deborah Linnington sat at the center, her signature smirk as polished as her pearls. To her left was a man in a golf shirt who looked like he'd never once set foot in dirt. And to her right, a woman scrolling her phone with nails that could scratch glass. Rows of homeowners filled the rest of the room, their chairs lined up like a church potluck. Some nodded to me, most looked away. And a few, the newer ones likely recent transplants from cities with stricter HOAs, looked at me like I was the contamination. I sat in the second row, binder in my lap, hat in my hand. I didn't speak to anyone, I just watched. The meeting opened with standard procedure finances, lawn violations, one woman complaining that her neighbor's dog barked too loudly at 7 a.m. I waited. Then came item number 7 on the agenda. Review of unregistered agricultural water extraction parcel to 11B. That was me. Deborah's tone shifted like someone dimming the house lights before a play. "We'd like to open a discussion about a well located on the Hammond property," she said, scanning the crowd like a talk show host. "As many of you know, there have been concerns raised regarding water usage, potential runoff, and environmental risk factors. Our board has consulted with experts who believe the well's placement may affect aquifer integrity and regional water distribution." Lies, not even veiled. I stood up slow and deliberate and walked toward the microphone set at the side aisle. Mr. Hammond, Deborah said, smiling thinly. You have 3 minutes. I nodded once, set my binder on the podium, and opened it. I won't take long. I held up a laminated copy of my original deed. This well predates your HOA. Built by my father during the 1972 drought. Licensed by the county. Tested yearly. It draws from a closed aquifer exclusive to my property. No runoff, no drainage, no contamination, just clean, regulated groundwater. A few murmurs rippled through the room. I flipped the page. Here's a report from 2009 when FEMA designated this area at risk for water scarcity. My well was one of only 3 private sources in the county considered stable. You want to talk about community benefit? I gave away over 800 gallons during that crisis, free. No signatures, no politics, just neighbors helping neighbors. Deborah leaned toward her mic. Mr. Hammond, while we respect your history, we've received complaints that the well may now pose a liability. No, I interrupted. You've received no such thing. What you received was a report from your own board's environmental subcommittee, chaired by your husband, citing speculative concerns with no evidence. I ate it. I have the internal emails. A hush fell across the crowd. I flipped to another page and held it up. Your board tried to fence off my land. You sent workers to drill posts 15 feet onto my property. That's criminal trespass under Section 602 of state law. I filed a report with the sheriff. I have video witness statements and coordinates logged. Someone in the back said Jesus under their breath. And now I continued. You've installed surveillance cameras pointed directly at my private infrastructure, without a warrant, without notice. That's a violation of the Fourth Amendment and a breach of county privacy ordinances. Shall I continue? Deborah's face was stone, but her eyes blinked once slow. We understand your position, she said coolly. But HOA bylaws allow for enforcement when a resident's activities endanger. I cut her off again. Your bylaws don't override state law, and they damn sure don't rewrite property lines. You may have gotten away with bullying new homeowners who didn't know better, but you picked the wrong man this time. Gasps now. The room wasn't with me yet, but it wasn't with her either. Then she did something I didn't expect. She smiled. Mr. Hammond, she said softly, the board has voted to place a temporary suspension on the use of your well pending full review. Any further extraction will be considered a violation of HOA code and may be subject to fines. I stepped away from the podium, but not before I said, then you'll need to find FEMA too because they'll be using that well next week. The room froze. Deborah's smile cracked just slightly. Excuse me. I've submitted the location and documentation to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, I said. They're conducting a regional drought impact study. They'll be on my property with full federal authorization. And if they find what I think they will, that well will be designated a protected water asset. The man in the golf shirt leaned in to whisper to her. The woman with the glass cutting nails stopped scrolling. The whole board sat a little stiffer now. I picked up my binder and walked out of that room. As I stepped into the night air, I realized something important. This wasn't just about the well anymore. It wasn't even about my land. It was about power who thought they had it and who actually did. And I wasn't afraid to remind them. The morning after the board meeting, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The kind of focus I used to feel when I was running coordinated logistics on deployment, when every minute mattered and the smallest oversight could cost lives. Now it wasn't lives at stake. It was legacy. And if the HOA wanted a war built on paperwork precedent and permits, I had decades of buried truth they weren't ready for. I spent the first half of the day at the county recorder's office. The building hadn't changed in 30 years. Chipped linoleum humming fluorescent lights, the smell of old files and black coffee. I greeted the clerk, Cindy, a woman I'd gone to high school with, and explained what I needed. Back property records, groundwater rights, easement maps, and anything tied to the parcel my father registered in '48, I said, especially around the drought years of the '70s. She gave me a slow whistle. You digging for a lawsuit? Something like that, I said. She helped me pull file after file, dusty blueprints, handwritten surveys, signed approvals from county engineers long retired or long dead. And then I found it a small folder marked Emergency Water Authorization, 1972. Inside a signed memo from the state's Department of Natural Resources. It confirmed that during the '72 drought, 3 wells in our region were granted emergency status for agricultural preservation, including ours. The well was approved for expansion capped at 150 feet and listed under the Hammond family deed with no mention of shared rights or encroachment zones. The second find made my blood run cold. A map dated 2001, long after the HOA had been formed. It was part of a rezoning proposal for nearby development, and someone had drawn a revised utility easement that bled past the original Hammond boundary. It wasn't signed by my father, wasn't co-signed by the county, and had a red stamp at the corner, draft, not filed. Yet somehow that exact draft map had found its way into the HOA's current zoning documents. I took photographs of every page, made copies, marked timestamps. Then I drove 2 blocks over to see an old friend, Pete Granger, retired surveyor, and one-time drinking buddy of my father. Pete now spent his days on a stool at the hardware store fixing broken lawnmowers and grumbling about city folks with no dirt under their nails. He raised an eyebrow when he saw me. "I heard you're wrestling with the HOA mafia," he said. "They're trying to claim my wells on their land." Pete spit into a paper cup. "That well's older than half their board, and you know it. Hell, I helped measure the offset when your dad drilled it. We used chalk lines and a busted transit. Do you have any of those records?" He looked thoughtful. "Maybe. My wife boxed up my old site logs when I retired. They're in the garage. You mind climbing over a few possum traps?" An hour later, we found the logbook, yellowed, grease-stained, but legible. There it was, 1972. Parcel 27B, Hammond Family Well, offset 7, foot east of Oak Line, 30 foot north of Cattle Post. Depth 148.3. Gerard. Confirmed. Cap install Aug 12th. More importantly, it included a hand-drawn plat with signatures from 2 county engineers and a notary seal. It was gold, the kind of documentation that courtrooms loved and bureaucrats feared. I thanked Pete, took digital photos, and carefully returned the book to his box. "You going to take this all the way?" he asked. "If they keep pushing, yes," he grunted. "Good. Some folks need reminding that land doesn't forget, and neither do the people who live on it." Back home, I started compiling everything into a master folder, one that could withstand court scrutiny. I built a timeline: original well permit, emergency, authorization, water tests, easement discrepancies, false HOA notices, attempted fencing, and now surveillance. Then I began cross-referencing the HOA's own documents. Deborah Linnington had signed several expansion initiatives in the past 2 years, including one that applied for regional grant money to install smart irrigation systems in the new development zones. Buried in the fine print, a clause mentioning existing groundwater access sources within adjacent boundaries pending regulation. They'd been planning this all along, not because they thought my well was a threat, but because they needed it. Their development was expanding too fast. The HOA hadn't budgeted for water rights or a proper pumping station, and now they were trying to retroactively claim my source as shared infrastructure. They thought I'd be too old, too isolated, too docile to fight. They were wrong. I contacted a water rights attorney I found through the State Bar website, Mary Langdon, a former environmental prosecutor with a reputation for eating zoning boards alive. She agreed to meet the next morning. "I've been following your situation in the local paper," she said over coffee. "It's a classic land grab. They're using community concern as a smokescreen for mismanagement. I've got documentation going back 50 years. I want it all," she said. "We'll hit them on trespassing, fraudulent zoning application, and possibly attempted eminent domain under false pretenses." She paused. "You do realize if we move forward, it'll get ugly. I've been in worse." She looked me in the eye, then nodded. "Then let's start with a cease and desist against the HOA board, demand removal of all surveillance, and submit an official boundary contest with the county. We'll freeze them legally while FEMA finishes their investigation." FEMA. I almost forgot I'd submitted my report to them a week prior. Included test data, aerial photos, and the 2009 emergency usage log. I hadn't heard back. That evening, as I was reviewing maps in my barn, an unmarked black SUV rolled down my gravel path. 2 people stepped out, one wearing a blue FEMA vest, the other in khakis with a clipboard and GPS tablet. "Mr. Hammond," the vest asked. "That's me. We're here to survey your property. The agency's considering your well for federal emergency resource designation under the current drought mitigation program." I couldn't help it. I smiled. "Come on in," I said. "I've got everything you need." I opened the gate. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't just defending my land. I was preparing to win. The morning they tried to take the well started like any other. Rooster crowing, wind sliding soft through the orchard, but something in the air felt wrong too. Still too calculated. I was feeding the goats when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel, slow and deliberate, like someone arriving with intent. I wiped my hands on my jeans and stepped outside the barn just in time to see 3 vehicles pull up to the edge of my fence. A black HOA truck, a beige county SUV, and a flatbed carrying a backhoe. It was a convoy. At the front of it all stood Deborah Linnington, crisp blouse clipboard under her arm, mirrored sunglasses reflecting my own stunned face. Behind her were 2 uniformed deputies I didn't recognize, and one man in an orange safety vest holding what looked like utility schematics. I stepped onto my porch as they approached. I didn't shout, didn't run. I waited. "Mr. Hammond," Deborah called out, "we're here to perform an emergency closure of an unpermitted water source." "On whose authority?" I asked. "The HOA board," she said. "In cooperation with the County Development Office and Regional Code Enforcement, we've deemed the well a safety hazard." I crossed my arms. "Then where's the court order?" She hesitated for a second, just long enough for the lie to show. "This is a field action," she said, voice smooth like ice. "Temporary closure pending administrative review." "That's not how the law works," I said. One of the deputies stepped forward. "Sir, we're not here to cause a scene. We've been asked to ensure the process goes peacefully." I nodded slowly. "You ever enforce a civil action without a signed warrant?" He glanced sideways, unsure. I pointed to the well. "That's 148 feet deep. Dug in 1972. Registered. Permitted. Tested annually." This I gestured to. "The truck is an illegal seizure attempt. You're trespassing." The man in the safety vest began unrolling a cable spool from the back of the flatbed. I stepped off the porch. "Don't do this," I said. "You'll regret it." Deborah approached me, voice dropping low enough only I could hear. "You think FEMA's going to save you? You think one government office is going to override an entire neighborhood's vote?" I stared right back at her. "I don't think, I know." She turned and raised her arm, signaling the crew. That's when I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. A FEMA field agent, Agent Soto, picked up on the second ring. "This is Ray Hammond. They're here trying to shut down the well. You need to stall them," he said. "The designation is final as of 10 minutes ago. The federal protection order is being transmitted to county enforcement and emergency management. Give me 5 minutes." I looked up from the call and saw the backhoe engine roar to life. 5 minutes. I walked quickly toward the well, standing between it and the machine arms, out like a scarecrow guarding the last patch of wheat. One of the contractors shouted, "Sir, move!" "No," I said. "Not until someone shows me a judge's signature." The deputy hesitated again, his hand now resting uncomfortably near his belt. "Don't I warned? This isn't worth your badge." Then, like a lightning bolt, slicing a storm cloud, a county sheriff's cruiser roared down the drive, lights flashing. It skidded to a stop in a cloud of dust. Out stepped Sheriff Dale Kinney, a man I hadn't seen since he helped bury my wife 5 years ago. He looked at me, then at the machinery. "Stand down," he shouted. Deborah turned incredulous. "Sheriff, this is a sanctioned operation." "No, it's not," he barked. "We just received emergency designation from FEMA. That well is now protected under Federal Disaster Preparedness, Code 42 CFR 468.22. Any attempt to tamper with it is a federal offense." You could feel the air suck right out of Deborah's lungs. "But we submitted the environmental hazard." Kinney cut her off. "Your submission was rejected. The well is clean. The aquifer is secure. And the only hazard here is your abuse of authority." The backhoe powered down. The worker stepped back. One of the deputies muttered, "You didn't tell us it was federal now." I looked at Deborah, who now stood alone, her clipboard drooping in her hands like a flag of surrender. "You're done here," Kinney said. "If I see another unauthorized vehicle on this property, I'll personally charge you with criminal trespass." Deborah didn't argue. She turned sharply and stalked back to her truck, slamming the door harder than necessary. The others followed in silence. Sheriff Kinney stayed behind as they drove off. "I'm sorry it came to this," he said. "They've been pushing too far lately. You held your ground." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I almost didn't make the call in time." He clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You did. That's what matters." That night, I walked back to the well alone. The sun had dipped behind the orchard, the sky painted in gold and fire. I knelt beside the old stone rim, running my hand along the edge my father carved with a trowel 50 years ago. We'd won this battle, but I knew the war wasn't over. Not yet. The night after the confrontation, I barely slept. I sat in my kitchen with the binder open on the table, legal papers spread out like a battlefield map, a half-empty cup of coffee turning cold beside me. The federal designation had bought me time, but I knew the HOA wasn't going to take the loss quietly. Deborah Linnington didn't strike me as the kind of woman who surrendered. She struck me as the kind who regrouped and retaliated. I'd spent too long reacting. Now it was time to go on the offensive. That morning, I called FEMA headquarters in D.C. I'd kept the number of Agent Soto's supervisor director, Marla Everett, a contact I knew from my years coordinating military logistics during Hurricane Harvey. She picked up after 2 rings, and when I said my name, she didn't ask who I was. "Ray Hammond," she said, "your file is on my desk." "Then you've seen the footage." "Yeah, I've seen it all, the illegal fencing, the backhoe, the sheriff intervention. What the hell is going on out there?" I didn't sugarcoat it. I explained everything, how the HOA had redrawn maps, falsified easement claims, used intimidation, and tried to seize a private resource under the guise of safety. I told her how they manipulated community perception, planted flyers, and posted illegal surveillance. "This isn't about safety," I said. "It's about control. They don't want my well because they're afraid of it. They want it because they need it." Marla was quiet for a second. Then she said, "You're right. The region's drought data puts your aquifer in the top 2% for reliability. That well's a strategic asset." "Then make it official," I said. "I want more than temporary protection. I want full emergency designation. I want federal status that no HOA or development board can touch." "We can escalate," she said. "But it's going to bring attention. Press politics hearings. You ready for that?" I thought about my father, his hands bloodied from digging stone the orchard we'd saved 3 times with nothing but rain barrels and prayers. I thought about Deborah's smirk as the backhoe revved to life. And I thought about the kids in the neighborhood who'd once filled up jugs from my well when the pipes ran dry. I've never been more ready. By noon, Marla had filed the request. By nightfall, the Department of the Interior had acknowledged the submission and sent a hydrology specialist to conduct a follow-up survey. Things were moving faster than the HOA could intercept. The next day, I received an unexpected call. Channel 3 local news. "Mr. Hammond, we heard about an incident on your property involving federal agents and the HOA. Would you be willing to give a statement?" I paused. This wasn't my style. I'd always preferred to handle things privately, quietly. But Deborah and her board had already waged their war in the public arena. Flyers, community meetings, gossip and slander, and gossip and slander and gossip and slander. Wait, no, that repetition seems like a typo, but I'll keep it as is per instructions. But no one was buying it anymore, because by then, the press had latched onto the story. Local veteran battles, HOA over emergency water source. One man's well saves a town in drought. The headlines weren't just clickbait, they were truth. That Friday night, I got an email from a woman named Lydia Grimes. She lived 4 houses down from the HOA clubhouse. She'd voted for Deborah twice. She was, as she put it, a rule follower. But she wrote, "I'm sorry. I believe them. But now I see what they tried to do to you, what they've done to others too. I just wanted to say thank you for not giving up, for reminding the rest of us that the land doesn't belong to the board. It belongs to those who love it enough to defend it." I read that email 3 times before I allowed myself to cry, because for the first time in this whole mess, I knew I wasn't alone anymore, and neither was my land. The federal assessment team arrived on a windy Monday morning. 2 white government SUVs pulled up to my property just after 7 a.m., tires crunching against the gravel drive as the sun filtered through the bare limbs of the orchard. 4 people stepped out, clipboards and handheld scanners in tow, dressed in field jackets bearing the FEMA logo. Agent Soto was back, but this time he wasn't alone. With him was a senior hydrogeologist, Dr. Naomi Patel, a no-nonsense woman with steel gray hair pulled back into a ponytail and an expression that said she wasn't here to play politics. "Morning, Mr. Hammond," Soto said, nodding. "We're here for a full survey and yield analysis. The Office of Emergency Management wants hard numbers for the Regional Water Index." I opened the gate for them. "You'll have everything you need." I'd spent the weekend preparing. Cleaned the well site, set up a folding table with every permit photo and legal document I had. I even trimmed back the nearby brush so their instruments would get a clear perimeter reading. Dr. Patel went straight to work, inserting diagnostic rods into the ground, around the wellhead, checking pressure gauges and taking water samples. She didn't make small talk. She didn't ask for commentary. She just moved precise and fast, like someone with too many sites to inspect and not enough time. I stood off to the side with Agent Soto watching the team operate like a well-oiled machine. "She always that direct?" I asked. "She's one of the country's top hydrologists," he said. "She certified the reserve sites in Colorado and Arizona. If she greenlights this, no one's going to question it." After about 20 minutes, Dr. Patel walked over checking her tablet. Preliminary readings show above average purity, negligible sediment, and a consistent draw rate of over 45 gallons per minute. "That's more than 3 times the regional baseline," Soto said, eyebrows raised. She nodded. "If anything, this well's performance exceeds many municipal sources." I couldn't help the flicker of pride in my chest. We've never let it go dry. My father always said, "Respect the well, and it'll respect you." Dr. Patel glanced up, then looked me in the eye. "It's rare to see one this well maintained. Whatever you've been doing, keep doing it." She stepped away to take another set of pH measurements, and Soto turned to me. "She's going to recommend a Tier 1 emergency resource status." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. He folded his arms. "It means your well isn't just protected. It becomes part of the state's emergency infrastructure. In times of drought, wildfire, or disaster, this site can be tapped to supply aid to the region. And the HOA, they can't lay a finger on it." The news hit me like a sunrise. Quiet but blinding. I'd fought for weeks against letters, lies, intimidation, and isolation, and now the government itself was saying, "This water matters. You matter." But I wasn't naive. Victory on paper doesn't always translate into peace. Later that afternoon, as the FEMA team was packing up, I noticed a small group gathering at the edge of my property. HOA board members. 5 of them standing just outside the fence line, arms crossed, watching. One of them was holding a phone up, filming probably. Deborah wasn't with them, but her presence lingered in their posture, stiff and confrontational. Agent Soto noticed too. "Do they do this often?" he asked. "Only when they're losing," I said. He walked over and calmly flashed his badge. "This is a federal survey site. You need to step back and cease recording." The man with the phone grumbled, but complied. The others lingered for another minute, before turning and walking back toward their SUVs, their footsteps slow and reluctant. It was over, but they weren't done trying. That night, I received an email from the county's Public Resources Committee. FEMA had submitted its full assessment. Not only had the well been certified, but the report included a recommendation to designate the surrounding 200-yard radius as a buffer protection zone, meaning no construction, excavation, or structural interference could occur within it. The HOA's dream of expanding their smart irrigation grid was officially dead. And just like that, the narrative shifted. The next HOA newsletter read like a retreat disguised as grace. In light of recent developments, the board acknowledges the well located on Mr. Hammond's property as a federally protected site. We appreciate FEMA's efforts to ensure community safety and will continue to work collaboratively toward a harmonious future. They didn't mention the fences, the threats, the lies. But I didn't need them to, because the town already knew. Within days, neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years stopped by. Some brought pies. Others offered quiet apologies. One man, a plumber who'd once helped install my backup pump, handed me a folded note. Inside was a list of names, 10 residents who'd privately written letters in support of my right to keep the well. "I didn't want to go public," he said. "My wife's on the HOA hospitality committee. But we were behind you." I nodded, heart heavy with gratitude. Better late than never. And then came the biggest surprise. The mayor's office called. They wanted me to attend the next town hall, not just to speak, but to be honored for preservation of critical infrastructure and civic resilience. I said no at first. I wasn't looking for awards. But then I thought about every veteran I knew who came home to fight quieter wars, not with weapons, but with paperwork and stubbornness, and a belief that right should still mean something. So I agreed. At the town hall, I stood on a wooden stage under a flickering light in front of a crowd of people who'd once questioned me, dismissed me, ignored me. And I said the only thing that mattered. This wasn't just about a well. It was about the line between power and decency, about remembering that the land doesn't serve the board, it serves the people. and the people have to be willing to protect it. They gave me a standing ovation. But more importantly, they listened. And when I walked off that stage, I knew the story was no longer just mine. It belonged to all of us. By the time the FEMA designation became public record, the air in our neighborhood had shifted. The whispers that once followed me to the post office or farmer's market had gone silent. The same folks who used to avert their eyes now offered handshakes and quiet acknowledgments. And the HOA, once so emboldened, so sure of their untouchable authority, had gone strangely quiet. But that quiet didn't last long. 3 days after the final federal report was uploaded to the emergency registry, a front-page story broke in the regional paper. HOA Board, under investigation for zoning manipulation and fraudulent easement filing. There it was in black and white. Mary Langdon had done more than defend me. She'd followed the paper trail I gave her, the bogus easement maps, the altered zoning drafts, and the falsified survey lines. And she'd filed them directly with the state attorney general's office. Now the entire HOA board was being audited. The fallout came fast. The vice president of the board, Donald Craig, the smug man in the golf shirt, who'd laughed when I spoke at the meeting, resigned within 48 hours, citing health reasons. By the end of the week, 2 more members stepped down, including the treasurer who had approved the unauthorized contractor payments for the fencing and surveillance equipment. And then there was Deborah. She held on longer than I expected. She doubled down with an email to all residents accusing outside influence and federal overreach of threatening the sanctity of the neighborhood. She claimed the board had acted in the best interest of water safety and that I had weaponized bureaucracy. But no one was buying it anymore, because by then, the county had launched a separate inquiry into HOA spending, and it turned out more than $80,000 had been diverted to community enhancements that somehow never materialized. A playground that was paid for but never built. A walking trail budgeted for twice but never extended. And tens of thousands in consulting fees to a company owned by Deborah's cousin. It was all coming apart. The final blow came when FEMA released a public memo to the County Board of Supervisors naming my well not only as a Tier 1 resource, but officially designating it as Regional Site Number A17, Hammond Emergency Hydrological Reserve. It wasn't just protected anymore. It was irreplaceable. The same afternoon that memo dropped, I was in my barn, repairing a cracked pipe near the goat trough when a sleek silver sedan pulled up outside the gate. I recognized the plate's county government. A tall man in a navy suit stepped out, briefcase in one hand, papers in the other. He introduced himself as Marcus Ellis, a liaison for the State Emergency Coordination Office. "We're preparing a countywide drought response plan," he said. "We'd like to formally include your well in our emergency routing logistics. With your permission, of course." I shook his hand right there. "If it helps the town, it's yours." He looked relieved. "You're one of the few landowners who's said that without blinking." "I've been through worse than a dry summer," I said. "But I won't stand by while others suffer if I can help." That night, as I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea and watched the sun disappear behind the orchard, I thought about the irony. The HOA had tried to claim the well under the guise of community need, but in their thirst for power, they ignored the very thing I'd always practiced: service. You give to your neighbors, not control them. You protect the land, not exploit it. The phone rang just after 9. It was Mary. "They've filed a motion to dissolve the current HOA board," she said. "Emergency restructuring, and there's talk of appointing an oversight committee." I sipped my tea. "Let me guess they want me on it." She chuckled. "They'd be fools not to." I thought about it for a moment. About sitting in those meetings, shuffling through agendas, and landscaping budgets, about spending my days arguing over fence heights and paint shades. "Tell them I'll pass," I said, "but I'll show up when it matters." She laughed again. "That's probably for the best." The next day, something strange happened. A knock on the door. I opened it to find a boy, maybe 10 skinny freckles, holding an empty plastic jug. "My mom said I could come ask," he said. "If it's okay. If we could fill up from the well, just to see what it tastes like." I stepped out and walked him over myself. Showed him how to turn the spigot gently so the pump didn't surge. The water came out clear, cold, ancient. He took a sip and grinned. "Tastes like snow," he said. I smiled. "That's how you know it's real." He ran back toward the road, waving his thanks. I watched him go, the jug swinging at his side. A few moments later, I noticed another figure further down the lane. "Deborah." standing across the road, arms folded, eyes shaded under a wide-brimmed hat. She didn't speak, didn't yell, just stood there. Then slowly she turned and walked away. That was the closest thing to an apology I ever got. And truth be told, it was enough. Because the land had spoken, the truth had won, and our well was still standing. By the time spring rolled around, the orchard had started to bloom again. Delicate white petals floated on the breeze, catching in the branches like whispers from generations past. The frost had lifted not just from the soil, but from something deeper, from the walls I hadn't realized I'd built around myself since this whole ordeal began. I didn't win because I had a louder voice. I won because I had roots. The well still sat where it always had. Only now there was a small brass plaque beside it. Hammond Emergency Water Reserve, dedicated to public service and community preservation. The state had paid for it. The town had voted for it. But I never needed the recognition. I only needed the reassurance that the story would outlive me, that the truth would remain long after the last HOA flyer was shredded and tossed. I wasn't bitter anymore, not even toward Deborah. Power has a way of convincing people they're immune to consequence. But when truth arrives, quiet, steady, undeniable, it humbles even the most stubborn hearts. She stepped down officially the following month. No statement, no farewell letter. Just a line in the HOA newsletter: President Linnington has chosen to resign to focus on personal matters. I heard she'd put her house up for sale not long after that. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw a party. I just took a walk one morning past the fence line, where they'd tried to stake new borders, past the street where HOA cameras had once pointed at my home, past the lawns that used to pretend not to see me. People waved now. Some stopped to chat. Others left jars of honey or loaves of bread on my porch, small tokens of thanks. One woman, Ruth, whose son had once played baseball with my nephew, brought me a handwritten note. My husband and I were too scared to speak up. You reminded us what backbone looks like. You didn't just fight for your well. You fought for the rest of us who forgot we had a right to our voices. I kept it tucked into the back of the binder. The same binder that had grown thick with pages, legal records, photographs, correspondence, but also with memories, testimonies, quiet wins. FEMA sent a second team out that June to install monitoring equipment, but they were kind about it. Never intrusive, never patronizing. They treated me like a partner. And when a nearby wildfire flared up in late July, the well was tapped to provide water to 4 separate relief tankers. I watched the trucks roll out of my drive, one after another, each hauling life-giving water into the smoke-drenched hills. That night, Agent Soto called me. We ran the numbers, he said. Your well helped save over 40 homes. The fire breaks held longer because of those extra tankers. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window, the orange glow of the flames far off, now softened by distance and luck. Tell the crews they're welcome anytime, I said. This land's been holding its own a long time. I'm just the caretaker. But even caretakers need peace. I started building a small bench beside the well. Nothing fancy, just wood reclaimed from the old barn door my father and I fixed up when I was 15. Every screw I drilled in echoed like a memory. On weekends, I'd sit there with a thermos and a book, letting the breeze carry the scent of apple blossoms through the air. Sometimes people would stop by, not to ask for water, just to sit, to talk. The well had become something more than a utility. It had become a place again, a gathering spot, a symbol. At one point, I even found a small pile of painted rocks left by neighborhood kids, each one etched with a word: hope, truth, stand roots. I never moved them. They stayed at the foot of the bench like offerings. One morning, months after everything had settled, I walked downtown to attend a community forum. I wasn't on the agenda. I didn't plan to speak. I just wanted to listen. The new HOA leadership, younger, more open-minded, was holding its first town-wide open meeting. No secret ballots, no hidden zoning proposals, just questions, conversations, healing. At one point, someone mentioned the well, said it had become a lesson in civic responsibility. Others nodded. I stayed quiet. But after the meeting, the new board president approached me, a man named Marcus Wynn, early 40s ex-city planner turned community dad. We'd like to name a yearly award after you, he said, for integrity in community service. I shook my head. That's kind. But I didn't do what I did to be thanked. I did it because it was right. He smiled. That's exactly why we want to name it after you. I told him I'd think about it. But deep down, I knew the real reward wasn't a plaque or an honor. It was walking home under open sky, down the same dirt path my boots had worn smooth, knowing no one could take it away from me again. It was the freedom of silence, not the silence of fear, but the silence of peace. Of having spoken and been heard. Of having stood my ground, and still being able to rest easy at night. And so I did. I laid down that evening with the windows open, the breeze curling through the curtains like a lullaby. The well pumped quietly in the background the same way it had for 50 years. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't worry about who was watching or what letter might arrive next. I closed my eyes and slept, not just like a man who had survived the storm, but like a man who had helped redirect the river, and the land faithful as ever held me steady, like it always had.